Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me today. Welcome to the Lloyd Show. Happy to have everybody here. Sorry for the delay. I'm 4 minutes late. Very apologetic. Sorry about that. It really really affects the quality of the show when you're late. So I try not to do that as much as possible. So anyway, thank you all for being here. Very glad to be back on this fine Wednesday. Um, It's been kind of a crazy day. The past few days have been very crazy, actually. I'm like tired. I'm like not feeling sick, but I'm just like feeling worn down. I've been up like I was on a very good like streak of just like a good rhythm and everything, but now I'm not getting enough. There's so much going on. I'm working so much and like have so much going on, so I've had to like stay up late and then get up early again for my obligations. And so, but that happens sometimes, I can deal with it. It was like that was a good thing that I like there's like certain there are certain like skills or maybe not even skills, but there's just like certain things that you pick up from the military. And so I'm capable of like now I like after that experience in my life, I don't get like tired and sleepy. I just like it's just like the tiredness like translates into like physical uncomfortability. I don't know if that makes any sense. So I just get progressively uncomfortable the more time that I like the more sleep that I miss out on and everything. So but we're fine. I'll get back in the rhythm now today. I think that'll be good. I don't know. Maybe tomorrow we'll see. There's just so much content, so much to keep up with, so much work to do, so much so much politics. We're doing politics here at the Jake Lloyd Show. Anyway, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, I've been rushing all day to get everything in order, and so I got everything set up at the last minute, got my show notes together and everything. So I apologize for being a couple minutes late, but we're here now. We have a good message today to discuss, and so that's what we're going to get into. Today, the title of the show is Reviving the American Identity. And you'll notice that I didn't say creating an American identity or establishing an American identity or even determining the American identity because America has an identity. The problem is that the identity of America, the character of the American nation, of the American people, has been suppressed and abused for so long. I don't have to tell you about the way that America has been portrayed historically in our own textbooks, in movies, in popular culture, etc. You know as well as I do that Americans, like the traditional American people, have been maligned like no other. I would venture to say, like, yes, people of European descent are uniquely attacked amongst the like throughout the world in a way that probably nobody has been before. And I don't mean that they've been abused more. Like there have been entire people who have been like GE genocided, and so like that's one thing, like literally completely exterminated. But like the malice that the rest of the world has towards people of European descent is particular in a certain way. However, I would say that beyond that, that beyond the like the great replacement that is underway, beyond the uh, attempted like cleansing of European ethnicities, it's really the American people and like the people of British descent who are like uniquely hated for some reason, for one reason or another. They receive all of the hate that the rest of European peoples do, but there's also this unique hatred, perhaps just because they and we are the most recent um, like global powers. You have the British Empire and then America, which some people view as like the successor state to the British Empire, that it's really that you really have this continuity of British civilization that goes from the British Empire and transitions into the American Empire. And so perhaps that's just because we are the current we have built like the collective we of the British Empire, and then America, we have built the empire which has been ruling the globe basically, or predominantly like the hegemon of the world for the past, like, you could say, like 200 years. I would say 200 years is probably, like, maybe a little bit more than that, depending on, I don't know when you would place like the true starting point of British global preeminence, but that's not really the point. So I think that we are particularly hated because no matter where you go, even in Europe, the line is that America has no culture, America has no identity. We're just this hodgepodge of immigrants and people from, and like people coming here to do business and invaders, whatever. And they say that we have no culture, that we have no identity. This is what I've been told my entire life, and I've been lucky. I think maybe it's partially just that as a child I was a little bit more perceptive, but I also think that it's a benefit of growing up. You know, my dad was not like there's a lot of people who are of the original American people, and they are submerged into like urban American life or suburban American life. And that's certainly the environment that I grew up in. I was by no means like raised on a farm or anything. Like, we were closer, like, give or take, like living like between rural and suburban communities growing up. But I was very much like grew up in the suburbs. However, my dad didn't. My dad grew up in a very rural area, very small town that was made up of nobody. Like, it was a very homogenous place with that was made up not just of like peoples of European descent, but it was made up of the people who founded the country. Like, the names in that town where he lived, where he grew up, and where you can still go there and look at the names of those people, and they have, like, there's still names of the families who founded that town. There's like you can there's a family there that has the same name as the people who founded, like, who built the first mill in that area. They founded the first church. I believe it was a Baptist church or a Methodist church, I can't remember. And they built a mill, like a water mill, on a river in this area. And from there, the town was built up. Never grew like to be very big. It was a very small town. And these people, many of these people that founded this town, which my family was there for, like various lines, whatever, however it goes. These people came west through Kentucky with Daniel Boone, and so my dad was like a part of, like, this is what he is descendant from. And now, of course, it's like for the past however many years, like 100, 200 years or whatever in this area, I would say probably like 120, 150 years maybe, like that, they haven't been living like Daniel Boone lifestyle. That's not how my dad grew up. It was basic, like, modern rural America. But this is the culture that it was from. And so I think that I was very lucky to grow up with that. And then my dad in his young adulthood moved it closer to cities and stuff. And so despite my growing up in this stuff, I think that I was just lucky enough to grow up with a taste of the old America, of the old way that things used to be. Like, the 4th of July wasn't it, like, much of what I grew up with wasn't this commercialized view of things that we have now. Because and many of you can relate to this. Many of you may hear what I'm saying and lament that this is what we grew up with personally, like in the popular culture. But even our national holidays are hollowed out. They're like husks of what they used to be. It's the 4th of July is much less about the celebrating the people that founded our nation, about celebrating like what our nation was actually founded on, and what transpired. And it's even just like about, well, here's the ideas, all men are created equal, and pursuit of happiness and all of that, which are in our founding documents, and those were important to our ancestors. But that divorce from the people and from the way of life that they were living is very hollow. It doesn't make any sense. And so in this way, we have not experienced a full, robust American culture in many senses, in many cases. We've been told that there is no such thing. We've had other cultural celebrations and like traditions foisted onto us. Like even now, like imagine being a child and growing up with Juneteenth being this big celebrated thing where everybody's celebrating it and nobody really knows what it's for, but it's like a black holiday and so everybody loves it. Imagine growing up with that. And this is something that we've all grown up with to one degree or another. Like the same thing with MLK Day. Like schools probably placed a higher emphasis on things like MLK Day than maybe than the 4th of July, but like other stuff like the civil rights movement when I was growing up in school, even though like the curriculum that I grew up with, especially for the portion of my life where I was homeschooled, maybe that's also another reason why I'm a little bit inoculated from the lies about our culture, but like the civil rights movement and everything definitely received a higher priority, a greater emphasis than the history of our nation outside of big events like the Revolution, the Civil War, World War II, the Great Depression, etc. These big moments in history get mentioned in the history books. We learn about those, but we don't really learn about who we are as Americans outside of those things. However, you'll spend like a whole year learning about the 50s, 60s, 70s, Martin Luther King, all of that and everything. And so, and of course, this problem goes beyond the 60s and 70s. This is a problem which can be traced all the way back to the early 20th century and the late 19th century. We talk a lot about immigration today and the effect that has on our country. That people, when they come here and they don't assimilate, it has a negative effect on our culture. It dilutes it, it washes it out. They replace it with their own customs and traditions and holidays and ways of viewing the world. And we know that that's true. Obviously, it's true. It's observable in your communities, probably if you have like immigrant communities. And for example, I'll tell you one story. I've told this story on like a casual, like late night stream before, but I'll tell it to you here. In the neighborhood that I grew up in, primarily for most of my childhood, there was this green belt behind us. There was this wooded area, and it was pretty big. I mean, I'm trying to think of how many acres it would have been. Like, the densest part of it, I would say, was like, I don't know, I would say it's between like 75 and 100 acres. And then there are like other parts like scattered out that have some development in between. But it was like, there was like a true, like, you could like really go in the woods. There were animals, there were coyotes, like the area, like I said, that we grew up kind of on the border between rural and suburban areas at different times in my life. And once this one got more developed, we moved further out again, just like standard flight, if you know what I mean. And not even because that area was particularly like homogeneous. What's the opposite of homogeneous? Heterogeneous or heterogeneous? Is that how you say? So that's a word that doesn't get thrown around very much. Heterogeneous. But there was just like negative changes of Austin growing outward, like California and New Yorkers and people from all over the place, all over the West Coast and everything coming into Austin, growing outward and changing it. So I guess in two ways I like have experienced this, like people moving from across the border and changing the culture of the place that I live in, as well as people moving from outside of like my culture within the United States and coming in and changing things. But that's not the point of the story. So there was this green belt, there were these woods behind my house. And of course, as a kid growing up, I was always back there, like just exploring, playing around, playing war with my friends, playing, all kinds of stuff, riding bikes, whatever. It was really, there was this pond, like this tank, that like, it was like a man-made pond probably, but, because I think we always used to find cow bones back there. I think that like, at one point it was owned by a farmer. There was definitely like a big open like pasture type field surrounded by trees, and so it was probably just the cows got into the woods and stuff and got caught and died or whatever, killed by coyotes, who knows. But we would fish back there. It was a very like, despite it being like suburban in the 2000s and 2010s, it was like very idyllic in certain ways. And But one of the coolest things was at one point, me and my dad were walking back there as we used to do. That was one of my favorite things to do as a kid was just me and my dad to go walk through these woods. And we found this, we were like crossing over and we see this like metal flag type thing. It's like a flagpole and it has a metal like flag shaped like a flag waving in the wind. There was no print on it, it was just in that shape. And we see that like sticking up over the tree line on the opposite side of this field. And so we see it and we walk probably 200 yards across this field to go see it and figure out what it is. And we get there and we walk through some thicket and everything. And there's this like granite or marble, probably just granite stone, with like a bronze or a copper, maybe brass. I don't know. It was like a brownish golden, metal plate that said it had some other information on there, but it said like here stood the first permanent settlement in Williamson County. And so looking at it, like finding that was a huge thing, and looking into it later, like there's there's other really cool stuff about it. Basically, they were pressing north from Austin into the frontier, which was this is not very far from Austin, and like it was a rough time. So it's interesting. It's an interesting insight into what life was like back then, because this is not very far north of Austin, but it like truly was the frontier, because they set up this settlement and they had a few families there, and it was just like some houses with walls between, and like people traveling would stop there from time, like to rest and sleep and whatever before they were going on to the next leg of their journey. But they had to deal with Indian raids, and like many people died, and there was like a cemetery somewhere around. They don't know the exact location of it in this area, but they know that it's like within this like square mile basically is where they know that this was, because at the time they weren't giving like GPS coordinates or anything, but when they said where it was, they gave like this thing like, okay, it's located at this point on the double file trail and in between this other thing. And so they know that it's in this area. And so that was super cool to know that I was living like so close to the place where there was established the first permanent settlement in this county. And so I used to like always hang around there and just, do other stuff, thinking about like, I'm playing games and I'm exploring in this area where there were like where other people were doing the same thing, but with actual like real stakes. There were really the people there trying to kill them. There were people there trying to hurt them. And so that was a very cool thing for me. And so then fast forward to some years later, we moved away from that house like in the latter part of my high school years. And then I went off and did my own thing. I was living my own life, and moved to a different city in Texas. And so, but I still go back to visit my family, of course, from time to time. And one time I was visiting there, and I was thinking, I want to go back and see what it's like. I want to go back to like this old place that I used to go all the time. And so I go, and now when I lived there, from about half of it, eventually it got developed the rest of the way, but part of the neighborhood wasn't even developed yet. And so you could just go around the houses down the street to the end and then go back into the woods. At a certain point, my dad built like a gate into the fence. And so I went a different way, because obviously it wasn't accessible through the old ways. I couldn't go through whoever's living there in this house. I couldn't go through their backyard. And I go into these woods, and I go down this like drainage ditch to get over like up this bluff into because imagine this, like here's the fence of the backyard. I'm like standing where the house is, looking over it. There's this drainage ditch, and then it goes up into this bluff, and then there's like, depending on where it is, there's like a flat part, or it dips down again, and these woods go both directions behind this whole fence line. But then it goes up again, and there is this like old there's this old, I don't even know what you'd call it, just it's like it was like a railroad. There was a railroad went through here at one point, and so it has this big I guess another bluff where these railroad tracks used to run. And down the road, down the way from that, there was like this old train bridge that goes over this creek. And so I went down and I looked in the creek, and it's all like stagnant and mostly dried up, and there's just these like puddles in the deeper areas of like really gross water, and there's just gnats and mosquitoes everywhere, and it was nasty. And this creek used to run. I mean, it used to be like a real like running creek. And so I cross over that and I go up, and I'm like expecting that I could push through and like go at least like see like where this field was and some of the other stuff. And it was weird. It was almost like pushing through into like a different world, like in like Narnia or something. But I go through this where the tree line resumes, and it's thick, and I can see stuff through the trees, and I'm like, what is that? What is back there now? And so I push through, and then I'm in this neighborhood. I'm in this neighborhood where this big open field used to be. It's a new development. And it was so weird because I was in the woods. I was prepared to be walking around through the woods and everything. And suddenly I'm in this neighborhood, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to go back that way, so I'm just gonna like look around, and I like look, and I'm walking through, and there's like people walking, dogs or pushing strollers or whatever. And development happens. Like it was kind of inevitable that this would happen, even though it made me sad. But what really just was like a gut punch was that none of the people there were like Americans. They were from India like a year ago. I mean, like they were like literally straight from India. And they were all from India. It wasn't like they were like there was some or anything, but they were all from India wearing Indian clothing or whatever. And it's because this area that I was living in is it had like I don't want to be too specific, but if you know where I'm talking, like if you know this place, you know where I'm talking about. But there's like, there's like some tech stuff, and there has been for a long time, even before there was a tech boom in Austin. Like there's just been stuff here, but they're all just there. I guess they're there to work at these places, these like tech companies that are coming here. And it was like, just, I immediately was like, okay, so people who like I'm related to, even though like it wasn't my family, like settling this part of Texas in the like mid 1800s or something. My family came here later from like other pioneer branches of the American people, but we all like I'm sure we all share common ancestry back to like the 1700s, the 1600s. And it's like, so these people, it's like my nation conquered this area and basically took it, like actually did take it from like one kind of Indian that was here. And then now like 200 years later, 175 years later, this area has been reconquered by a different kind of Indian. And this is in America. This is in the United States. This is in Texas. And it was like I walked through, and I knew where I was going, just even though there's like streets and everything there. And there are like houses over the spot, because the one thing, despite them not knowing exactly where the permanent settlement was, they were pretty sure that they knew right where the cemetery was, but they weren't sure. They couldn't be sure, and there wasn't like there wasn't big enough push or desire to like try and find it out for sure. And so like right over top of this spot where this cemetery probably was, where people had been killed in like Comanche Indian raids or something, there was like a cul-de-sac of people living there now. And so while that's like a tangent, we know the effects that these migrations have on the culture of our country. Because this, like I said, it wasn't like there were Indian people living there amongst like a normal American neighborhood, and they were like speaking the language and dressing like us, um and like barbecuing and throwing the football around, because that's just not how it works actually. Like it's not possible for that to happen. But it was just it was like an ethnic, what do you call that, like an ethnic pocket, an ethnic whatever, where they chose to set up. But the reality is that this is not unique to non-European peoples that have immigrated here. All immigration has done this. If you go back to Ellis Island, this is the same thing that you see with Little Italy, and of course, like you have Little China, like at the same time popping up, or I guess maybe a little bit later. I'm not sure if the Chinese Exclusionary Act was still in effect like during the height of Ellis Island. I can't remember, but you have little Italy, you have little Poland, and little little ethnic communities where they've ghettoized themselves and refused to assimilate. And they eventually, like, same thing now, you can talk about white flight and how it pushes people out of neighborhoods and everything. But you look at Boston. Boston is known for being like an Irish place now. Boston, Massachusetts. It's the subject of movies. You watch like The Departed. It's like a mob movie, and it takes place in Boston, Massachusetts. Well, Boston, Massachusetts was the home of John Adams and all of these great like English statesmen and thinkers and writers, and even like people who would go on into the interior of the continent to do the work that so many people did, the civilizing of the continent. But they were pushed out of that city that they built and they founded by people who had arrived like within the past few years, like at that time. And so this isn't to villainize or demonize those people. They're here. They are, at this point, they are in America. Like, there's no, like, we have to figure out a way to go forward, but we must understand that this is not unique to people who look different than us or don't speak the same language. The American identity has been under assault for far longer than just since the 1965 Hart-Celler Immigration Act. This is something that's been affecting the United States for a lot longer. Even you go back to like, this is the case even with some of the German immigration in the late 19th century. They, like, albeit they assimilated much more easily than other ones, because like Germans are much closer to the original Americans to begin with. There were a lot of Germans here originally, and so they can get in there. And but even then you have like pockets that popped up, and they were very tough to. It was tough to get them to assimilate. So this is a problem that is universal with migrations into the United States or into any country. And so the point of me saying this is really to try and remind us all that the problems that we're facing with the American identity and our American identity crisis, to put it bluntly, this goes back far beyond just the Hart-Celler Immigration Act. And that's something that we have to understand, and that's something that we have to acknowledge and make peace with. People on both sides, regardless of what your whatever your heritage is prior to that, we both need to understand it, accept it, be realistic about it, but we have to return to a solid American identity. And as I said at the beginning, I'm not talking about forging a new American identity. I don't believe that we need to forge anything new. I don't think that we need to create anything new. But we have to return to we have to, because the majority of the people in this country, or maybe not the majority anymore, but the biggest demographic block in this country are people of that descent, of the people who founded this nation. It's what worked. It's what made America what it is now. There has been an attempt in online right-wing circles, whether it's like, I don't want to name names, like with the one that was big in like 2016 or 17, to try and make it like this pan-European nation or something like that. That doesn't work. It's not working in Europe with the European Union. I don't know what makes people think that would work here. Like other like tradcath movements in like 2018 and 19, they wanted to adopt this continental, like Mediterranean culture in the United States. And then you have people who have no idea that this is even a problem, or that this is even something that needs to be done. People, even when they are reacting against the stripping away or the dissolution or destruction again of American identity, whatever you might call it, even when they're reacting against it, a lot of the time they don't know what they're doing, or they're choosing something wrong, because this concept is so alien to them that America has an identity. It's so alien to them that they don't even know how to properly react against it. They don't even, and this is not necessarily like, I'm not like bad mouthing them and saying this. It's very unfortunate, and like even I with like my background and my growing up in the way that I explained it to you a few minutes ago, even I cannot experience America in the same way as like my great grandfather. There's just not a way. But that doesn't mean that the identity is not real and that it doesn't exist. And just because somebody doesn't know about it or doesn't understand what the vestiges of that are all around us, doesn't mean that it's not the right path forward. Because we have to have something. We have to have a cohesive understanding of ourselves, or a coherent understanding of ourselves, rather, in order to move forward. So it's not, the path forward is not to adopt some bizarre political system from the mid 20th century, if you understand what I mean. Look, nobody, if you followed me for a long time, you know that I have a great affinity for monarchy, and especially the British monarchy, but also like the Holy Roman Empire. You know that I have a great affinity for this. You know that I think that it's actually a good government system, that there's a lot of benefits to it that republicanism cannot emulate in certain ways without certain tweaks to it. But you can't force something like that on America, because that's not who we are. That's not what we are. They don't want that. They don't, in the same way that they don't want to become like a mid 20th century Italian socialist, or a or whatever, or a Bolshevik, or anything like that. They don't want to be a monarch. They don't want to have a monarchy. They don't want to become like traditional Latin Mass Catholics in like rural Idaho. These are not things that the great majority of people in America want, because legitimacy, whether it's government or culture or ethno, or like the foundational like nationality, like the foundational stock of a nation, whatever it is, like legitimacy comes from continuity. And so you can't just force things on people. You can't just shove things on people because you think that it would be better, or because you look at how it affected somebody else in the past in a different time, in different place, and then say that we should do that here. You have to take into considerations not only our present situation, but the character of our people and the historical nature of our culture and our government tradition. A problem with the Trump movement even is that despite Trump and the people who supported him, like the Trump base and everything, despite them trying to return to a time of American greatness, the whole motto is "Make America Great Again." But all of the symbolism, all of the imagery is from World War II, not even really World War I. The 1980s, like our great industry in the early 20th century. But rarely does it go beyond that. Outside of that, you get vague platitudes about the Civil War and the peace that was made, and the freeing the slaves and all of that stuff, and how, a more perfect union and da 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 da. But it's all vague platitudes before World War II, or arguably like the industrial age in the early 20th century. So even with Trump, somebody who wants to return to American greatness, who wants to make America great again, you don't have a proper understanding of who Americans are and what this nation is, what it should be. And the problem is like there's no roots there. There's no roots, because that last century was like a great uprooting of America from the soil that we were like deeply planted in, that we were growing in. Our roots were growing down. We were just under a century, or just under 2 centuries of establishing ourselves as a separate nation from Great Britain. Like right at the culmination of our ethnogenesis, you have this great uprooting, being pulled up from the earth and like thrown into the air and like tossed around, and so you can't base a coherent identity in anything from the 20th century. But we do have like a history. We have a real history. And has to do with culture, which includes like literature, music, etc., holiday celebrations, these sorts of things. It involves our history. Our history is so deep and so broad. The amount that happened in America between not just the revolution, but the founding of Jamestown all the way up till today, or all the way up till 1940. It was incredible. It's amazing. We were like this hyper energetic, powerful people who did so much, wrote so much, accomplished so many great things, conquered an entire continent, spread throughout it, populated it largely. Obviously, I mean, America's not even like fully populated yet. We have these huge city centers and stuff in LA, New York, etc. But the vast majority of America is still wilderness. And the places where we have seriously populated it are they're not even like the surrounding rural areas are not even properly developed in the way that rural areas are in Europe. So this is like at the very beginning of our nation, and we have still accomplished so much, but we all know so little about it. It includes philosophy and religion. Like, reading great American authors is so important. Like, do you know that presidents like John Quincy Adams is like a recognized poet? Like, if you read certain, like American poetry books and stuff, his is in there. And I don't know if that's because he's such a great poet, or just if it's because it's pretty good poetry and it's significant because it was written by one of the earliest American presidents. But these things matter. Like, pride in these things matter. And one of the greatest crimes of the dissident right online especially is this erasure of American history. There's this tossing aside of our history and our heroes because of a false belief that they were bad men, that they were fake Christians, that they were Masonic, like French revolutionaries, like proto-French revolutionaries, and none of it's true. These were great, great men. These are our heroes. If you're of that stock, these are your ancestors. These are your forefathers, literally. And there's this attempt to downplay it, to say that it was all flawed from the beginning, that our successes were a fluke and that our failure was inevitable, and so we have to change into something else. You look at other types of alternate, like so-called right-wingers, like these people who want to increase immigration from Latin America because they think that it will make America more Catholic and therefore more conservative. These people are enemies of America, not because they believe in like it's a lie to believe that the only enemies of America are the people who believe in like progressivism, liberalism, that support killing of children in the womb, that support like immoral activity like homosexual marriage, or or the gender ideology and stuff. Those people are not our only enemies. We have people trying to destroy the American identity from the right, allegedly. In that, we cannot allow that to happen. The American identity has to be preserved. It has to be preserved. Because it's like, that's part of who I am. And even if you're like mixed between like immigrants who came here in the late 1800s or whatever, and this founding stock, like, you should still be proud of that. You can still be proud of that. Like CivNat, like populists or whatever, they like will talk about people being proud, like that come here and like are proud of the American traditions and want to integrate into it. Well, everybody in America should be wanting to do that, and everybody should be like proud just to be here in this nation, to have been allowed into this nation to live and thrive and prosper, and should want to serve the country that gave them these opportunities. And the country that gave these opportunities to them is made up of the people who were here in the 1600s, 1700s, that established the government that we have based upon like ancient Anglo-Saxon, like Germanic legal codes and everything. This, like, it goes so far beyond. The principles that our government was founded on were not Enlightenment values created in 1776. These are ancient things. They've been twisted and distorted for various purposes and agendas throughout the years. But these are like, this is our Constitution, and I don't mean our written Constitution. Like, the written Constitution was very, it was a big deal for America to choose to have this written Constitution, but all nations have a Constitution. Like, Britain has an unwritten Constitution. It's like, this is what common law is. It's precedent, and it's like, it develops common law, tradition, the constitution of a nation develop with the people. And so what we need to understand about America and the American people is they didn't magically appear here created by some god of enlightenment values and Freemasonry to establish this written constitution. But these people have been on earth for millennia. They have grown and evolved and developed the traditions that we have. They have they've moved from one place to colonize another, to colonize the rest of the world, and they've brought their traditions and their culture with them. And then here in America, it was written down into a constitution to enshrine it because of the superiority of this tradition was needed to be preserved. And so they chose to do it through a written constitution. Whether or not you agree with that or whatever is one thing, but these values are not bad. If you hear anybody saying that these values are bad, or that these people were bad, or that they were subversive or anything like that, you need to understand, like, this person either doesn't understand the founding, like maybe you or I have misunderstood it at one point or another. This person either doesn't understand, or they are an enemy of the people that founded this nation. And again, it's not something saying like, if you're not this guy, then you don't get to be here. But it's like, there is a certain group that accomplished all of these things. And if you're going to come here and accept the benefits of that, like, we need to understand that. We need to be realistic about it. And so what's important for us to do is, number one, learn it, because this has to be preserved. It has to be passed down. It has to be promulgated throughout our nation. There has to be a true revival of this culture and an appreciation of this culture. We have to learn it, and that means reading American authors, reading American philosophy and poetry and other literature. You have to understand what we were thinking at one point. Like, there's this disconnect. There's this like great severing that happens between not like the old world, meaning Europe, but just like the world before and then the world after. Like, I don't know, there was just this like huge rift that happens in the middle of the 20th century for whatever reason. Well, not even the middle of the 20th century, but just throughout it. There's this great like rift that's placed between the world now and the world as it used to be. And unfortunately, that includes our culture and our heritage. And so we have to learn that. We don't have the same mindset. We don't think in the way that they used to, but we need to understand them if we want to relate to them, if we want to carry on what they started. And so we have to learn it. We have to read it. We have to know the songs. It may sound silly, but you should know the songs that were important throughout American history. Like, 200 years is not a long time. It's a handful of generations. It's not LARPy to want to know the songs that your great grandpa sang when he was in the army or when he was a kid. That's not LARPy. Now, if you're like thinking like, oh, I'm going to learn these ancient traditional Scandinavian songs and we're going to LARP in the woods and do this and whatever, that's like not the same thing as wanting to take part in your culture. This is your culture. This is your birthright. You should love it. You should cherish it. You should guard it. This is yours to have. Don't let them take it from you. Learn it, understand it, love it, live the culture, celebrate the holidays truly. Like, if you're celebrating the 4th of July, it's not just a time to get together and eat hot dogs and eat hot dogs and hamburgers and watch fireworks. You should really deeply, deeply internalize what it's about, because it's about more than winning a war for political ideals. That's not what it's about. It's about a people. It's about a people establishing themselves. It's about a people establishing themselves, and that is worth celebrating. It was about your forefathers. It's a celebration of them, and so you should internalize this, and you should celebrate them. And in doing so, when you live this out, you are spreading it. Like, when you live it, when you know the songs, when you know the literature, when you talk about it with people, when you like these things become internalized. It's not this superficial like, oh, well, I have a painting on my wall and I can appreciate it. Like, I can be disconnected from this and appreciate it for what it is. Oh, wow, look at this, mid 19th century painting, like, created by this guy. Like, you should. it should affect you. It should profoundly influence you. And if you immerse yourself in it, in the art and in the culture, the songs, the literature, like these ideas begin to work themselves into you and into your behavior, and you live it. And when you live it, like this has an effect on your family and on your children. You should create American children. When you have children, you should raise them as Americans, true Americans. You can do that. You can preserve America by having children and raising them in the American tradition, in the historical culture, in the historical tradition, in the historical religion of the American people. And in doing so, you re-tie yourself, you reunite yourself to the forefathers that came before you and fought and won the inheritance that has been passed down to you and which is now being stolen from you by international corporations and globalist NGOs, the very government of the United States. It doesn't have to die with you. You can learn it, you can live it, you can spread it, and ultimately our goal is to re-institutionalize it. Once upon a time, this was the way that America was. It was the culture of the government and the people. It's been thrown out of the high places of power. It's been thrown out, and now that state power is directed against you. But by truly living it out and then moving forward in our lives the way that we talk about in other ways, politically, socially, etc., you and I can reinstitutionalize this culture, and we can again be the nation that our forefathers established with their blood. And that's why I say that we have to revive the American identity. There is nothing new to establish when you have something so great and beautiful and lovely from the people that came before you. And now we'll go and see what chatters have to say. If there are any questions or statements or anything like that, any support. If you'd like to super chat, I meant to say this at the beginning of the show. If you'd like to support the show and my work here, you can do so at entropystream.live/Jake Lloyd, and I'll answer your questions or read your statements. And and I, of course, appreciate the support. Okay. Yeet Peterson, good to see my good old friend Yeet Peterson. Good to see you, buddy. We've missed you around these parts. Good to see you. Thank you very much for the super chat. He says, Jake Lloyd, our Anglo. Me and Yeet Peterson, like being Anglos, epic handshake moment. All right, let me check DLive really quick. I accidentally closed DLive. All right, let's see what the live chat has to say briefly before we wrap up the show today. I'll tell you, it feels very good to be back. It feels good to be back with the show. Honor 232 asks, just because this is a simple question, do you like capitalism or collectivism? I'm not sure that those are like necessarily. I'm not sure what you mean by collectivism. I'm not opposed to capitalism. Like free markets are not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with having free markets. The problem is like the system we have now, which is called capitalism, like global free trade and everything, is a disaster. So that's, or the way that like obscenities and everything are allowed in the name of freedom of expression and free markets. That's not what our founders had in mind. So I'm not for that. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you tuning in to watch today. I had a great time as usual, and I will be back tomorrow on Thursday to for the next installment of the Jake Lloyd Show. I'm really feeling good about it. We're getting rolling. It's going great. Um, if you like, I would recommend the stream that I did. I'm just pushing this one out there because I think that it's particularly important. This one also, share this one with your friends if you want. I appreciate that. Um, like and comment, whatever your thoughts are. I always read the comments because I enjoy people's thoughts and everything. And so, but that, and then I would recommend if you want, like there was a stream called Heirs of His Eternal Kingdom that I made the other day, and I'm particularly proud of that one. I think that it's good, and I think that it's important. It's really a Christian message. It's like about how Christians should engage in politics, but it is primarily just about the Christian faith, I think, and the way that we should see the world. So thank you all very much. I appreciate you tuning in. And I appreciate the super chats a minute ago. Thank you all very much. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that it was useful information, and I hope that you have a great rest of your afternoon. Until I see you tomorrow, have a blessed evening. I will come back. I was just about to close out the stream, but I saw that good old Yeet Peterson, true friend of the show, and a good guy, good friend, good true American, as they say, like Bill the Butcher. I know that I die a true American. Yeetie Peterson will die a true American whenever his time comes. But I saw that he super chatted, and so I want to respect that. He says, for $20, thank you very much for that. I appreciate you, sir. He says, can't believe I'm watching the American Dissident restore order before gamer time. Reminds me of a long lost bygone era. Yeah, those were different times. Those were different times back in those days. Very idyllic times, but they're gone. Maybe something better will come along, though. We'll see. So thank you very much for that, Yeet Peterson. And now I will once again leave and wish you a blessed evening.